KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more, Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
I'm Andrew Bracken, and this is Screen Time, featuring conversations about technology and kids in today's digital age. When talking about social media use and its impact on the mental health of young people today, the conversation often gets dominated by perceived harms. But online spaces have also become a central way for young people to connect with each other, especially amid an emotionally challenging, often lonely period of life. And that's especially true for young people from the LGBTQ+ community, as well as other marginalized groups. Daniela Munoz Lopez is a researcher and PhD candidate at the University of Washington, and she studies the complex relationship between digital media use and adolescent mental health. She shares more about what the research tells us and why she feels it's important to include youth voices in discussions around technology and kids. Our conversation started by talking more about what we know about the connection between media use and adolescent mental well-being.
What's tricky about this is that a lot of things are often so mixed. There's a lot of research out there that's looking at the relationship between digital media use and adolescent mental health and well-being. So many studies out there, and it's tricky because there are, some conflicting studies. There's some studies that are showing really negative effects, but also some studies that are showing really positive effects. And that's also just the nature of the research. It's really hard to get a definitive answer. And because of that, I really actually like to think of social media use as more of like a double-edged sword in the relationship between adolescent mental health and well-being. What we're seeing is that there's a lot of opportunities for benefits and for adolescents to really like find community and find sources of support. But there's also unfortunately chances for internalizing symptoms like depression and anxiety to be almost exacerbated or be influenced by social media, digital media use. So it's a really complex piece of literature just because there's so much changing, so much going on. There are a lot of opportunities, which I think is something that is sometimes not highlighted as much, but it's definitely super important to think about as well.
In relation to social media use, you mentioned, the sense of community. Tell us more about that, how you're seeing that play out in the research and your area of study.
So social media spaces and digital media as a space of community is super important and super critical, especially for adolescents who maybe come from a marginalized community. For example, we can think of how there could be adolescents who are part of the LGBTQ+ community who maybe don't feel comfortable or don't feel safe reaching out to people in person and don't feel comfortable with finding those sources of support in person because maybe they're not able to and they're not safe doing so. But with online spaces, they can reach out to others and find these groups and find these communities where they can ask, reach out, and get support, relate to other people. And we can also see this with like other marginalized groups as well, how they can really just go on these digital spaces and find others that they could relate to and find sources of support in that way that maybe is not easily accessible in real world spaces.
And we have seen some research point to greater social media use in Black and Latino youth compared to other racial groups. Can you talk a little bit about what we know about racial disparities in children's media use?
So I should say the research that I do in the lab that I work in, which is the Interact Lab, so the International Adolescent Connection and Technology Lab, which is led by our fantastic PI, Dr. Lucia Mikis Weinberg. We primarily study social media use and digital media use in international spaces, primarily in Latin America. So a lot of the work that I've done has been largely focused on understanding the experiences of Peruvian adolescents. And with Peruvian adolescents specifically, we are seeing that older adolescents and girls tend to experience more of these internalizing symptoms, like symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, especially in relation to something that we call digital stress, which is essentially the subjective experience of being online.
Yeah, can we talk more about that idea of digital stress? Can you break it down? I mean, What does it consist of and how does it play out? Like, how can parents and young people kind of see that arising in their lives when using devices and social media?
So digital stress is a really interesting concept because it's taking into account the experience of being online, which can be characterized by like notifications that you're seeing online, interactions that you're having online, or just the fact of having your phone around you. What we tend to see is that there are increasing rates of digital stress, and typically what we see is that girls and older adolescents are experiencing more digital stress, and that these do have a relationship with internalizing symptoms. So that's symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, and perceived stress.
Do you know what age young people become most vulnerable to some of these mental health impacts?
Typically, what we tend to see is that the onset of a lot of mental health disorders starts in adolescence. So that's around the 10 to 15 age mark. That's when we start to see a large rise in anxiety, depression, eating disorders. So it's a really vulnerable period. And when you think of adolescence, there's so many developmental changes that are going on. You're going from elementary school to middle school to high school. There's a lot of biological changes. You're going through puberty. You're also establishing your own sense of identity, your own autonomy. So there's so many changes going on. And social media is actually interacting with all of these changes at the same time. So we do see that this onset really tends to start in that adolescent period, which is such a critical window of opportunity for also like intervention and understanding of what's going on.
What tools are available for young people, their families, to better manage digital stress?
In our lab, we work a lot with Common Sense Media, and they have a really great course on digital citizenship where it walks adolescents through, I believe, 6 or 9 topics of just being users of digital spaces. So it talks about like cyberbullying, phishing, that kind of stuff, and really gives adolescents the tools that they need to navigate these online spaces. There's also really great platforms such as the Social Media Test Drive, which was developed by Cornell University. And it's essentially like a mock Facebook that adolescents can go onto and essentially practice being online before they actually get their own account. And in our lab, we're actually currently working on translating the entire Social Media Test Drive to Spanish so that it could be more widely accessible.
You mentioned this social media test drive, like a social network with training wheels as a way to kind of learn
Yeah.
how to use it. That's a really interesting approach, and probably something a lot of like older adults could have used. How important are efforts like these teaching tools or these ways of handling these very powerful technologies? How do you think they're doing, and what do you think is missing?
Yeah, so I think some of the tools that we currently have are really beneficial in just being able to teach youth about what they could encounter online, what they're likely to see and experience online. And there's so much, that goes into being a digital citizen, of being in these online spaces. So I think the tools that we have now do a great job of being developmentally appropriate and really taking and trying to take into account adolescent experiences. I think something that again is extremely crucial and so beneficial is just having adolescent voices because adolescents do have their own autonomy. They know how to use social platforms to do a lot of good, to really advocate for themselves, to come together as a community and really like move forward change. So they really are experts of these digital spaces. So what would be super beneficial is having more of their voices in everything that we do and having their input. And this is something in research we like to refer to this type of work as like having a youth advisory board. So having youth actually work and talk with researchers about the research that's going on. So is the research actually capturing what we want it to capture? Is it capturing adolescents' experiences in the best way? And this is something that I think could be implemented a lot more as well, is just having adolescent input in the moment while things are being developed.
And finally, you've kind of covered a lot here, but I'm just curious if you can leave us with one thing that you'd recommend for parents or families, at least to think about when it comes to adolescents and their use of media.
So it's super important to think about how, again, there's so many opportunities of being online, and these opportunities aren't going to come about without that scaffolding. So having these conversations with adolescents, modeling the social media use, the digital media use is super critical and important. Also, adolescents really have their own sense of autonomy. They're developing that, they're developing their own sense of identity, and it's really important to be a part of that and just listen to what adolescents are saying and what they're experiencing. Even something like doing a TikTok dance with your adolescent could be so beneficial because you're sort of entering their world, their space, and trying to understand what that's like for them.
You can find more resources on all things kids and tech at our website, kpbs.org/screentime. What questions do you have when it comes to your kids and screens? My email is screentime@kpbs.org. I'm Andrew Bracken. Thanks for listening.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Markel Design and Remodeling, helping homeowners with their home remodeling needs. From ADUs to kitchen remodels, room additions, and custom homes, Markel Design and Remodeling can help homeowners design and build their dream homes. More at trustyourhometous.com.